Hello, everybody. Welcome to the event tonight. Great to have lots of people, and isn't it lovely being together again? So thank you all for coming, despite the fact that the weather's ghastly, but anyway. So tonight we're going to talk about technology in agriculture. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Annette Nabavi, and I'm one of the board directors here at Women in Telecoms and Technology. There are several other board directors here, Audrey at the back, who is sorting things out for us, and Yasmin, who you saw as you came in. Don't think Helen's got here yet, has she? She's coming in right now. So there's another board director about to appear over there. As you probably all know, Women in Telecoms and Technology puts on about half a dozen events like this during the year, and we've got some more events coming up. I'll tell you about those at the end. So this is the first event of 2023, and we've got three superb speakers who are going to tell you all about what they do in this particularly interesting space. So I'm going to start by asking Addy Windsor-Clive to tell us a bit about the venture capital world for AgTech. She's an investment director in a fund that's putting money into ventures that are going to make a big difference to our lives. They've already got 5 ventures, I think. The fund's only been going a year, and some of those are really exciting ventures. So she's going to give us a bit of a background as to why technology in agriculture is important, and then tell us a little bit about the fund. So Addy, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for having me here this evening on the panel. So I work for Regenerate Ventures. We are the only EIS AgTech, early stage AgTech fund in the UK, and we focus on decarbonising the agricultural sector and sustainable food production. And so I will come on a bit into that in a minute. So first, what is AgTech? So AgTech, the definition of that is that any investment, or sort of any improvement in via technology that's improving yield, efficiency, or profitability on farm for farmers or for growers. And so where we see AgTech and split up from the agri-food tech is that it's upstream, sort of inside the farm gate, working on food production or sort of food manufacturing. And the food part comes further down supply chain, where you can see here sort of in the yellow part is AgTech, and the second part seems to be more the food tech side of it. So I think where people sort of think that AgTech is very niche in what it is, because but overarching view on agriculture as a whole is that there are many technologies and sectors within that. For example, you can have biotech and genetics, digital platforms, marketplaces, robotics and AI, satellite imagery and sensing, and then bioenergy and sort of circular economy. So this sort of, even though it seems, and I get told this every day, gosh, you work in a niche sector. But actually, when you're looking at the sort of sectors within that and the tech behind enabling these different parts of the sector, it's very wide and diverse. So why AgTech and why now? And so our food system is ripe for it, is that $10 trillion is the market size for food and agriculture, growing up to 16 trillion by 2030, which is an enormous jump that we need to be feeding our population. And the way that we're going to be able to do this is through agricultural innovation, because at this point in time, we need to be feeding more with less land, more people with less land. And that's the only way this is going to be possible, is through innovation. And agriculture, even though it's one of the oldest industries, is the last to digitize and modernize. And the amount of, as you can see here, 25% of the world population is involved in the agri-food supply chain, and 40% of land is used for agriculture. So it plays a huge part in employment, but feeding the world, and we feed ourselves 3 times a day. And I think people forget that sometimes. So how is AgTech helping global food supplies? So we're at a real crossroads of political and economic pressures coming in from Brexit, COVID, war in Ukraine, from Brexit, from labour shortages because of lack of movement and seasonal workers, COVID, because of closed borders. We saw that food safety and food security was never more of an issue than it was then, of something that we took for granted, especially in the UK, that on a global scale as well, is that the movement of food and labor has really had an impact on that. And the war in Ukraine in the recent year and a half is that not only, as we're probably all aware now, that Ukraine is our breadbasket of Europe, but also Russia produces all of our fertilizer for our land. And without fertilizer, there is no crop. Well, there is crop, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a huge sort of supporting system for it. And that fertilizer prices have hiked 3 times. And farmers that are on very small margins have now made some very tricky decisions. And that's where innovation can come into it, stop being so reliant on things like fertilizer. So a few areas, sort of technologies that will help ease some of these sectors is with labor. They're robotics. One of our companies is called Muddy Machines, which saw this issue of the back of Brexit and picked the most high value crop, which is asparagus, that was most affected by labour shortages. Just sort of a quick fact that the UK needs 70,000 seasonal workers, and we only are providing visas for 20,000. So farmers are putting crop in the ground, but the problem is that food is not being harvested, and that's causing a lot of food wastage, which then feeds into this. A third of food produced from human consumption is wasted. That's only going to increase with labour shortages. So what Muddy Machines does is that it autonomously picks asparagus, but also has applications to pick asparagus and tennis broccoli and courgettes. And not only is that solving labour shortages, but what that's also doing is predicting crop yield in the future, is that it can see that in 3 weeks' time, for example, a spear is ready to then be harvested. What they can do then is say to Tesco's or whichever one of the big retailers are, we are going to have 30 kilos of asparagus coming in on this day, which means that retailers can then plan their supply chains much better and reduce the wastage from it. Another one for sort of digitization, helping global food supply chains, is that digital platforms are helping companies and farmers deal with regulation and the regulation change that's happened since Brexit. As there's been a lot of change, and this is also why it's a real crossroads for agriculture, is that subsidies have been taken away, innovation has come in, and so it's a real peak time for farmers to be able to use technology to be improving efficiency and understanding the best way they can be making the most out of ELMS. I don't know if any of you have come across, I'm sure you've come across ELMS, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is being able to sort of subsidise farmers going forward on a natural capital viewpoint. Hydroponics can also help from food security. Vertical farming, you might know it as. This enables that sort of leafy greens that we're very reliant on from importing in the UK. As you can probably see, it's dark quite a lot of the time, and our food production during the winter is severely decreased. So technologies like new farming, like hydroponics, can help with this. So just moving on to AgTech as well, and why we think it's an important time to be investing in this is that how AgTech can help the battle against climate change. And I think that where we see most of the investment into VC coming in from AgTech is coming in through climate or impact investment and investors. As you can see, sort of 75% of the Earth's topsoil is now degraded. That's sort of the top 6 inches where food is produced, and nutrients, that's where most of our nutrients have come from. And the issue with that is that carrots today, as just one example, are 40% less nutritious than they were 40 years ago. And the reason for that is because the soil that is being grown in has been degraded through the use of fertilizer and chemicals. And that's something that we need to change. And so through the use of biostimulants, we can sort of change our and regenerative farming practices. We can transition across and try and build up our soil, because soil health is, on top of agricultural technology innovation, soil health is the number one, and that's what we're all trying to achieve with that. And with that, and how it links into climate, is that if you've got happy soil with good soil microbiome, carbon sequestration is much more likely to happen. And your better root structures within there as well will also equate to carbon sequestration, which is obviously number one, trying to have carbon removals. The other one is the agricultural sector emits 31% of global carbon emissions, and this comes from food wastage. So technologies that you can invest in, sort of robotics and drones to do crop prediction, to stop this food wastage in the supply chain, will have huge effects on reduction of emissions. It's not only the cows that are causing the problems, it's a much wider process and bigger issue than that. And again, sort of a quick one on that one is deforestation, which we're all very aware of. The alternative proteins that fall into the category of new farming as well can also help alleviate the stress of the deforestation to produce more cattle and livestock. Sorry, I think I'm probably very over time. So just some quick ones, predictions for 2023 and what we'll be looking at and the technologies that we want to be looking at in VC in the AgTech sector is nutrient density in food. Going back to the point about carrots, is that there's topsoil, and improving the way to produce more food with less is also to producing more nutrient dense food going forward. Solving labor shortages, carrying on with robotics and AI and any technologies that can be doing that. Improving efficiency through precision farming. This is going back to sort of the whole of AgTech as a whole, the definition, but anything that can be doing, making sure the inputs that we're doing from either as chemicals or fertilizers are being used in the most efficient way possible, that labor is being used in the most efficient way possible, the seeds, everything from start to finish that can be automized, because it's, as I said, it's the last to digitize and modernize. And so there's a lot of room for improvement there, even at the very basic level. And the last one that we're looking forward to seeing is water management. Water scarcity, you've probably heard, is becoming more prevalent on a global scale, especially you see most of it with almonds in California, but it's also coming in the UK, and also our reduction of reliance on fertilizer usage and the runoff from that is causing problems and issues into the UK. And I think with the need for global housing or sort of housing markets in the UK, there's a struggle for water from farming and also the housing issue with it. So that's what we're looking, that's what we're looking in VC. AgTech VC is what we're looking to be investing in.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. So that's given a bit of an overview as to where some of the early money is going and where the emphasis is. What we're now going to look at is two very different farms which are already using technology in the way that they are producing the goods that they produce. They're very different farms. One is a soft fruit farm, the other is a large arable and animal farm with lots of other things on it as well. So I'd like to start by asking Marion Regan to tell us about Lowe Farms. Now Marion, just to introduce her briefly, she actually studied botany and horticulture at Oxford just after I'd left, so there we go, and is now the managing director of Lowe Farms, which is a family farm. She became managing director in 1996. And she's done lots of work on plant propagation. She's also on the board of an Australian fruit growing business. And I'm sure she'll tell us about the robots that go over to Australia. I get this feeling that they must have first class seats or something. And she's currently a director of the Oxford Farming Conference and various other things she'll tell you about. Anyway, what we wanted to tell you about is her farm. So over to you, Marion. Thank you.
Thank you. And what a great introduction from Addy. I totally agree with your predictions. That's great. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Marion Regan. I own and manage with my family a fruit and arable. We do have arable as well in Kent. It's been in the family for over 125 years. So you might think I was a traditionalist, and you might think that this is probably typical of our strawberry production. That actually was filmed on our farm. That's Catherine Zeta-Jones in her breakout role in The Darling Buds of May in the 1980s or something. But I totally disagree with this characterization of agriculture as a traditional industry, slow to adopt new technologies. And I'd like to spend a little time dispelling that myth. This is actually a much more typical scene and has been for the last 15 years of the way we grow strawberries, which is on tabletops, and we grow in substrate. We also grow our raspberries in a similar way. But more of that later. Addy referred to the current crises. Obviously, they've been two of them been a long time in the making. The last is perhaps, or the top one is perhaps more recent and very much affected by recent geopolitical events. But these are the things we are facing as farmers. And the pressures of low margins, very slim margins, imbalanced supply chains where the power is concentrated away from the primary producers, labour shortages, and inflation in all of our major costs. Most of those are nothing new. The whole time I've been in farming, we've been facing that. So the drive for change has been constant, and our productivity has just about kept pace. And it's all been thanks to the rapid adoption of new technologies over time. So a little bit about our business. Yeah, we're 5th generation. We're in Kent, but we also have a sister business in Tasmania in Australia, thanks to a school friend of mine who moved over there, and I went to visit her, and we stood in the middle of this beautiful place in Tassie, and we thought, this is very like Kent. So we now have a joint venture with them, and it's one of the largest soft fruit businesses in Australia. So that's great. But in Kent, we grow about 6,000 tons of soft fruit. And we're farming about just over 700 hectares. And roughly a third of the farm is in fruit. The third, or a little bit over a third, is in arable combinable crops. And the balance is really managed for the benefit of wildlife or environmental schemes. So I sort of characterize it as a third, a third, a third. We produce all our fruit under tunnels, and our plants are all grown in peat-free substrate. And these are our customers. We also supply one or two others. We supply through a grower-owned cooperative, which is marketing through a company called Driscoll's, which is a very well-known large soft fruit, the world's berry company. We've been supplying customers like Tesco's, M&S and Waitrose since the 1970s. And we're really totally customer focused. We're very market led. But this is inseparable really from our ethical and environmental values. We employ nearly 1,000 people at our peak, and pretty much all of them live on the farm. We also employ a lot of local employees. So of our sort of 70 permanent employees, they live locally. We participate in industry-leading ethical schemes, and we're also, how I've met Penelope is that we're also involved in environmental schemes, and particularly one called LEAF, which is a mark of quality and environmental performance. So we've got a long-standing environmental plan. It encompasses water, waste, energy, crop protection, soils, biodiversity. But recently, we have set a science-based target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. I think we're the first fruit farm to do this. And this is an ambitious target, but so we're undertaking to reduce our emissions year by year, and then to go a bit further and to look at ways in which we can, those emissions that cannot be negated, we'll actually look at ways of sequestering carbon within our own farm. So it's all within our own land holding. Farming this way is clearly impossible without any innovation. And in the supermarket supply chain, as I mentioned, margins are very slim. Power is concentrated away from us as the producers. And I put up a slide which shows probably our biggest challenge. So the blue line is an index of our price as a percentage of our price 15 years ago. So you can see we're not getting any more for our strawberries. So whatever the chairman of Tesco said the other day on, he's completely not referring to fresh produce, or certainly not our sector, because they're not paying us anymore. The orange bars are the rising minimum wage. Obviously, with bonuses, people can earn more than that, but that's the, and the predicted minimum wage for this coming year is actually going to be higher than that orange bar. So this is why we have to keep really focusing on labour productivity. And what technologies have perhaps made the biggest difference over the last few years? And I'm going to highlight 5: data, genetics, controlled environment agriculture, integrated pest management, automation and robotics, and then finally, nature-based solutions. So starting with data, we obsess over data. Strawberry crops, if you crop at 60 tonnes a hectare, which is a very good yield, can be worth well over £200,000 a hectare. But we monitor our costs to within a penny a kilo. We're that slim and we're that obsessed. So we capture very precise data on climate, microclimate, plant stress levels, pests. We've got smart insect traps, waste levels, obviously yields, and the cost and the timing of every operation done to that field. So we use a whole range of sensors, tracking technology. A Formula One car has apparently up to 200 sensors to make it perform well. Well, I think a hectare of soft fruit will, won't be up to that, but it needs a level of precision to get performance. Recently, we partnered with Vodafone. Vodafone are a sponsor for Wimbledon, and we are the strawberry supplier to Wimbledon. So they wanted to show how a Wimbledon strawberry was grown, and they have a company called My Farm Web, which does sort of data integration. I'm talking to people who know about this sort of stuff. Anyway, they came and they were very interested in how we could, what sort of sensors we're using in our crops and how they could integrate them using their My Farm Web technologies, and also how they could track the journey of a strawberry from the field to Centre Court, which is where they made a nice film. But and so that's a nice collaboration. This is an old graph, but it's just an old slide just to show that irrigation is absolutely key. We have sensors measuring moisture, pH, electrical connectivity, temperature, light, temperature, relative humidity to trigger irrigation rounds, because water, as Addy mentioned, this is the next big looming problem, and we have to focus on water use efficiency. We are in the over abstracted and dry southeast of England, so it's very important to be very precise. And the other thing that Addy mentioned, which I totally agree with, is if you don't know what is coming, you can't grow it properly, you can't pick it, you can't market it. And poor estimating is one of the biggest causes of food waste if you get it wrong. So the data on the number and stage of flowers and fruit is combined with weather forecasts and also AI learnings from past crop performance to predict future yields. And ideally several weeks in advance, which is not very easy. So currently we're doing this a little bit manually and using an app, but we're working with a robotics company which is capturing the data, and that's going to revolutionize that. Sounds like most robotics companies are doing this. Actually, they're, the robot does one thing, but it also gets loads of fantastic data. So data is really important. The next thing is genetics. So this, I remember going with my father to look at seedling plots at East Malling Research Station, 50 years ago. The innovation in new varietal development is absolutely critical in agriculture, but particularly in our sector, in fruit. Heritage varieties are lovely and everyone loves them, but when you grow them, you realize that they tend to be small, disease prone, low yielding and lack flavor. So
all great.
Yeah, compared to the new varieties, which are developed, and there are some very good high-tech breeding programs, several of which are based in the UK. And these are some that we work with. So very large seedling populations have to be assessed and the best varieties selected. And so advances in this area include high volume phenotyping, which is often used with, they're looking at robotics to do that, analyzing data to find the most productive crosses, gene mapping, genomic selection, and in the future or about now, gene editing as well to promote pest and disease resistance to avoid the use of pesticides. This is really critical area, and you know, around all of the other AgriTech, don't forget genetics. But the main thing noticed by customers is nicer strawberries, sweeter strawberries, better shape, better eating quality. Polytunnels, so controlled environment agriculture, you tend to think of as vertical farms or greenhouses, but in fact on a field scale, we've been trying to partially control the environment for quite a long time. And tunnels extend the season, reduce fungal diseases, and they optimize the working and growing environment for plants and for people, also for bees. But the main thing as well is they provide reliability of the crop. I've always said to the Wimbledon people that we covered our crop before they covered Centre Court. You know, rain can't stop play. You can't say, I'm sorry, Tesco, I haven't got any strawberries today because it's raining. You know, they wouldn't like that. So we use various profiles of tunnels and different crop covers. We've trialed, it didn't go down very well, a sort of yellow tinted crop cover. So various different spectral qualities of crop cover to affect, that one was being tested because it affected the behavior of a pest insect. But it wasn't, everyone felt a bit queasy working in it, so that wasn't very good. Yes, so automated venting structures and so on. The future of this, and we're working with a company in the agrivoltaic space, so that, you know, the cogeneration of both crop and energy, and then using the energy to electrify the kit that you need in that space. So your robots, often you don't have a grid connection in the middle of a field, so your robots, your sensors, EVs of various sorts, you can, we're looking at how we can develop that. Whizzing through, and I don't need to go into this too much, but crop protection is obviously another area of innovation. This is a nice picture of some pirate bugs that are very voracious predators of thrips, and we totally rely on biological control in soft fruit, and only use chemicals when very strictly necessary because they disrupt all of your biological control programs. But another interesting bit of technology which we're doing this year, you know this, one of Addy's, this is Big Sis, which is sterile insect technique. So what they do is they sterilize male fruit flies of a particularly invasive new alien pest, only arrived here in 2013 and is already a significant pest of soft fruit. The sterile males are introduced into the fruit crop, and they obviously have very low, well, they have zero fertility, and thereby the population is suppressed. Looks like it works really well. We're going to be trialing it on a proper commercial scale this year. And so that could be very interesting. I realized it was one of yours. And then that's another example of new technology in crop protection space is using UV light to control mildew. You apply it at night. It's really useful to do it with robots, then you don't have to have humans there because humans don't really combine very well with UVC light. This is a company called Saga Robotics, and we're using this commercially now. This is actually all happening. And that leads us quite well into other robotics. Labor is 50% of our costs. A large part of that is picking. Just like with the asparagus, the founders of Dogtooth Technologies, I think, chose the most difficult problem they could possibly find to get into robotics, which is picking strawberries. And if I were to say that some of our really good pickers who are just brilliant and highly skilled can pick at 45 to 50 kilos an hour, then these robots have really got to perform to beat that. The problem is there aren't very many of those people, and they are a dwindling number. So robots have to actually compete with humans in the cost field. So it's not necessarily the speed, it's the cost of picking. So if you can value engineer your robots so that they're not too expensive, and they can operate throughout the night over a longer period, then you can come close to already you can come close to supplanting the worst pickers. So, you know, that's a really big advance. We're working with this company, Dogtooth Technologies. I'm a director of it as well. And they have, they're in the business now of proving the core picking technology, but they're also developing things like the yield prediction as well. And we had 40 robots working in one field this summer. And then they ship them over to Tasmania, so they get 52 weeks a year work. This is not there yet, but this tech is coming, and it will augment people on fruit farms. We're never going to not need skilled people on fruit farms. These are tools to augment people, and I think that's a really important point to make, because otherwise you imply that there's sort of no need for people on fruit farms, and the farmer's foot is still very much needed in all of this. You can't do it all from a laptop, and you need to actually go and look at your plants. So innovation can help deliver our 5 pillars of our net zero program, but I was going to so increase, particularly improving productivity from every input. So, you know, this again speaks to what Addy was saying. We need to improve productivity and efficiency from the land that we have. But sometimes low tech is just as important as high tech, and it certainly needs a lot of science and innovation to support farm decisions. These are sheep grazing a crop of winter cereals because, like I'm sure Penny will tell us, we're very interested in how to adopt regenerative farming techniques, and for that you need a lot of data and a lot of understanding as well. So this is no less techy. And so we're increasingly looking to nature-based solutions to the climate and biodiversity crises. So we're talking about soil sequestration of carbon, flood mitigation, and rewilding. And this is actually just as much part of a fruit farm as the other stuff I've said, because we're part of a supply chain that's that needs to be sustainable. So I hope I've managed to show that farmers are not idle when it comes to adopting new tech. In many ways, I think we're sort of leading the charge. I don't think agriculture in this country is slow to digitize. I think we're well ahead, but that's it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. That's really interesting. And that has given us, I think, the most extraordinary feel as to, excuse me, what your strawberries are like when you buy them out of Waitrose. I mean, you just buy a packet of strawberries, don't you? And then you don't think about the fact that these have been through all these technologies. It's just amazing. So thank you very much, Marion. That's really, really good. We're now going to turn to Penelope, who is a member of Women in Telecoms and Technology and has been for some time. And I turned to her earlier this week because the speaker that we had planned to come and talk to us about vertical farming wasn't able to come. But Penelope runs a large farm in Worcestershire, Worcester-Gloucester border. And since 2012, she's been encouraging her farm manager to really start to adopt all the things that we've been hearing about and more. So what she's going to tell us about is what she's been doing on her farm. And some of that is very telecoms oriented, because we've often talked about ADSL and putting fiber in and lots of mobile stuff as well. So over to you, Penelope, and thank you very much again for stepping into the breach.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm sure I totally agree with an awful lot of what both speakers have said, especially soil and water. If we don't take our soil and water seriously, all of us will be doomed. Anyway, I'm Penelope Bossom, and I look after the family farm and family rural businesses, which includes the farm. I never realized that I would end up looking after a farm. So unfortunately, I came to the job just about 24 years ago. But without much qualification in agriculture. I had done some gardening and some composting, but that was about it. But luckily, I think it probably put me on the right land. So we are in the Cotswolds, which is quite different than Kent. We go up to 1,000 feet. Breeden Hill is a little outcrop with a beautiful view of the Malverns. And then we go right down. So you've got Brash, which used to be quite light coloured, but we've been doing lots for our SOM, our soil organic matter. I hate acronyms. Then we go through normal loam, and then we go to sand and gravel country, where we had made some money with gravel pits in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and the 60s. And then we go to clay right at the bottom, and we've got a bit of the Vale of Evesham. So we're actually in the Evesham asparagus area, but we haven't yet to do a deal with a local grower. We don't employ very many people. We only employ 5 people, including the farm manager on the farm. We have got 2 shepherds in a partnership. They come and do the hours on the sheep, where we have to provide all the things and the technology for the sheep. And we have some very good growers. Farmers really do arable in the our sort of world, and growers do fruit and vegetables. And so we're in Vegland in the Vale of Evesham. So we have 2 growers. With one we grow on the top of the hill, picking peas, which come in nice little bags in August. And when there was terrible weather everywhere, we weren't flooded and everything else. So we had, I think, almost the whole country's supply. So that was probably nearing the value of your strawberries, but otherwise nothing is anywhere near the value of that. We do a lot of the 3 things. I think I'll go on to the next slide just to I'm very glad you didn't talk about the leaf wheel, because that's always my savior. We have lots of children on the farm, and we have lots of people that we tell about what we do. And we used to have a very one-coloured, well, it was just different shades of green, but showing all the things that we have to concentrate on for having a farm. If I look at the different sides of technology, because the other 2 have been very good at explaining what's going to happen next. But years ago, when I took on, we had a farm manager who had a microlight. And that was the way that he looked at the crops. And he also had a brother who had a camera with all sorts of lenses, so he could also do some spectrum stuff from the microlight. And this was before I took on in the millennium or whatever. So we were innovating then, and we were getting towards what then went to drones, then went back up to satellites. And now actually Skippy Scout is a company, I don't know, they are trying to be the basic drone, but actually it's like a dog. In a way, a farmer needs a basic drone to understand the real forefront of technology, because unless you actually use it and feel it's your sort of second hand, and this certainly not my second hand, this microphone, unless you can, you're never going to get anywhere with it. And I was today at Hawkesbury College, and they have got a very good AgTech sector. And the big challenge for UK farming is really the people. Now, I'm incredibly lucky. 3 of my men have worked their whole lives, over 40 years. They're all my age, and they went straight from school. Yet they've always been curious. So they've always, you know, whether it was a CB radio they had, when they were flung this very expensive cross-slot drill, which means you don't have to plough the land, and it was so expensive, and I drove off the road when I heard how much I was going to be expected to pay for it. Anyway, and I've got a picture of it up the road. But what made our team learn how to work it quicker was being on a WhatsApp group, and they'd never heard of WhatsApp. Being on a WhatsApp group with farmers in Australia and New Zealand was fascinating, because they could say, "Ooh, I bet I would do this." And the brother would say, "No, I'd do that." And they had a little chat about it. There was no pressure because they weren't in the middle of harvest. And this poor farmer, the other side of the world, was hoping that somebody would come up and mend it or do something or whatever it was going to be. Looking round then the wheel, organizing and planning, our men now, not only do they have WhatsApp on their phone, they have a brilliant, they take lots of photographs for Instagram and to show each other of the problems that are happening. They have their timesheets, which are automatically done on their app, same as the building team have the same sort of timesheet that goes in eventually to zero, which is what some of you might be looking after your businesses with. But then you see a brilliant app. And I saw a brilliant app that was well recommended by high organizations in our sector. And they were trying to make us buy it. And I asked the very simple question, how do you get the data out? Oh, well, we haven't really got an export. Well, if this app was the data checker for our security, for our safety, so our electric doors going up and down, for checking that our machines work properly, all that would be lost if the company, which is a young company under 5 years old, goes bust. And lots of, it isn't in Addy's portfolio, otherwise I wouldn't have mentioned it, but it's despicable, I think, that that product is trying to be sold. It's very good, but it has no backup feature. If things go wrong and that company go bust, okay, it backs it up onto 2 servers or 3 servers or whatever. But if I don't like that company anymore and I want to take my data, it's incredibly difficult. So you think you found something good, but you really have to watch out what you do with it. I'll come back. So here's our cross-slot drill, which is that machine, which looks actually quite small there, but it is big. And each of those sort of bucket things can put different things in. So you can put seeds in, you can put on the fertilizer, you can put all sorts of things that we're experimenting with at the moment. And then on the front of the tractor, you can also put, people are doing these wonderful liquids that are magic liquids, and we mix them up, and some of them are doing really well, because if you can get the stems of your plants thicker, then the naughty insects can't come in. And we also use the traps and count not as many traps, because when we do arable, which is wheat, which we grow for Kellogg's programs, of Kellogg's Origin Farm, we also grow Molson Core barley for Carling Black Label. We grow sometimes oats in our cycle, but always beans, and that put wonderful nitrogen back into the soil. In the combine, we got a John Deere combine, but the I can't even think of the word. We have a McDon header, which is the wonderful thing that you can see. We were the first farm in the UK to have this Canadian header, and a lot of people now are not buying the header that goes with the combine, and we might even buy a different header to do a different job. So you've always got to be looking out to check what is there. On the front of the combine, the tractor, you'll see two little lights, and there's a big yellow thing, and that is RTK, real-time kinetics, and that is a sort of zooped up sat nav that gets us down to about 3 inches. So we do save an awful lot of our product and nasty things going into the environment by knowing exactly what we have placed exactly where we want, with one pass of a machine as opposed to several passes and an awful lot more diesel. And we never try, which is with our regenerative farming, we never try to let our land go with nothing in it. And we haven't ploughed for, well, since probably about 2015, unless we've got the veg farmers and they pay us enough money to grow potatoes. We don't grow potatoes at the moment because of it, and we also have grown some onions or some salad onions, and they obviously need a lot of cultivation. Here are our sheep, and they're on a cover crop and some lots of lovely things. And with the sheep, they all have little tags in their ears, so we have an automated drafting system, which means that once they get on the weighing scales and the lambs get on a weighing scale and they're over a certain amount, they go left, and if they weigh under that, they go right. But we can identify the families, we can identify all sorts of things. We're on our 3rd piece of software for that. So the statutory recording, you get into big trouble if you don't record every movement of every one of those sheep. So it's a lot more than just looking at the future, the genetics, which is interesting, but the fetal egg count, the worming, you don't have to do as much if you check what the worm counts are, and then you can prescriptively do it. And here is back to the soil again. And all these things, if we can measure exactly how much carbon we sequester, and we have done so many carbon audits and things. Jake won Soil Farmer of the Year 3 years ago. And we thought it was going to be easy. And it's not. The more technical the kit is to measure it, the more the soil sequesters carbon and then it releases again. It is difficult. You can do very basic tests, which work best, almost the best, which is testing your soil organic matter, and then you know that you've actually got the carbon in the soil. And here are, oh, I didn't know I was going to have this one, but here are some of our biodiversity. A lot of a farmer's job is connecting with locals so they can actually understand that we do things for birds. And the bottom right one is quite a rare little bunting. We've got a lot of people taking photographs. These guys come from Wolverhampton and they've helped a lot of local people ring the birds. And back to me. It is fascinating how many birds you actually get, but I don't think we've even started proper counts.
Penelope, thank you very, very much. That's really interesting. I love the photographs of the birds. Aren't they gorgeous? Yes, let's make sure we've got loads of those around the farm. We've now got to the point where we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. So what I'd like to see is, are there any burning questions from the floor? I'm sure there must be. We have a roving mic, and please just pop your hand up. you've got some questions immediately. Hugh? Yeah, you get a microphone as well. Exactly.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you so much. Very interesting. I guess my question would be initially perhaps for Addy. It's something you touched on quite briefly, but the usage of satellite data and what the future of that could look like with agriculture.
So there's a wide variety of applications that satellite data and imagery and sensing can be done. One that's in our portfolio is helping farmers reduce their nitrogen usage, which is the sort of main component in fertilizer, which is kills a lot of the soil microbiome, and also nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So what they're doing from that respect is helping farmers, giving them a plan to do it, and then using satellite imagery and sensing and in-field data, allowing them to sort of verify that this has been done. But again, mapping of land for agriculture and also for forestry has been interesting, seeing what crops have been put in where, and also for weather systems. That's also where satellite imagery and sort of, and again, coming back to what Marion and Penelope were saying, it's all about data and being able to get this data back to farmers as quickly as possible so they can use it as quickly as possible. So we're using weather systems as sort of a main one that farmers can, and also pests. You can also use satellite imagery to detect pests in fields for them to sort of come back quickly or make decisions within hours to get pesticides out there, or hopefully reduction in pesticides. But that's the key important bit is analyzing that data for the farmers to be able to use. And again, it all sort of plays into prediction of yields and also land usage.
Anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is please better weather forecasting. And apparently there is a new, I mean, there must be always new satellites going up, but we're looking to improve always the quality of weather forecasting, because it all depends. We're farmers, it all depends on the weather. If we'd had the lady from the vertical farm, she would have said, aha, well, I'm
not interested in it. Yes. Yeah, exactly. I just wonder with the satellite imagery though, do you have to be attached to a particular satellite company that will provide you with that data, or is that data freely available to all farms?
No, it's a mix. I mean, so for our nitrogen reduction company, they're working with NASA and their data, and there are satellites constantly going up that are releasing data, and so it's just, I think this is also a big one that I think it's Tesla have now put a huge amount of satellites into space, and then hold the data with that as well. So yeah, I think it's pretty broad right now, but I think the potential concern down the line is that it might tighten, and that the people that are owning specific satellites then hold all the data for certain sectors and markets.
Exactly. So they hold all the data and potentially charge for it to the extent that it becomes unusable for the average farm. I don't know, but that would be a danger, I would have thought.
We have got data from satellites, and it's various deals with various people.
Yeah.
We're an agri EPI, so we test a lot of things. So I try and forget what I'm not meant to tell everybody, but it's there. I don't think we saved huge amounts of money, but DEFRA use satellites to check that what we say, and that your margins are exactly the width, and it's not an exact science, and DEFRA sometimes I think are very irritated.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And other questions? Anybody else got it? Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Nature and biodiversity came up in all three of your presentations, but it doesn't sound like there's much of nature tech in your farms yet. And I didn't actually see biodiversity or nature in your predictions, Addy. So I'm kind of curious where you see nature tech fitting into AgTech in the future.
We've got lots of nature. I don't know where to start. I don't quite understand why nature tech, that it isn't very easy to monitor nature with sensors. There are apps, and I tried apps for bird sounds, but I don't think even they are brilliant. But you can, for insects.
Yes, you can do. There are smart insect traps. I suppose the big sort of question, and this is when people, the policy makers, are designing schemes, and when private finance is designing methods of monetizing nature or biodiversity, then the big divide is whether you measure like habitat creation, or you measure, because those things you can measure, or whether you measure outcomes. Outcomes are really hard to measure. So there are companies that are doing things that are looking at DNA in stream water and that sort of thing, which is quite interesting. Or sound, measuring sound and detecting diversity in insect calls and so on. I'm a bit cynical about all of this, and I sort of feel like if we really want to drive change, obviously you want good outcomes, because people could just say, well, you know, I've set aside that lovely meadow, and so can I have my money, please? But, you know, is it actually doing the job? But how hard is it going to be to really measure this? So I think the jury's out, and there'll be hopefully some really good innovation in that space.
Yes, I think it's very early days for that. And I think it's also, the measurement needs to be over quite a long time scale, so that you can see whether or not you have increased a particular population, whether it be flowers, or whether it be insects, or whether it be mammals. And I think that's part of the problem for the environment generally, is to try and measure those changes. What we do know from some of the reading that I've done is that we've certainly had a lot of depredation of the wildlife, particularly insects. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying, the percentage decrease in insects over the last 30 years. And the jury is still out as to what potentially might be causing that. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. And it's not all going to be the farmers who do that work, although they'll probably be recipients of some of it. Yeah, very interesting. Another question? Yeah?
Yeah. Hi, Annette.
Oh, on the Zoom. Yes, that's a good point. We do have people who have come into this meeting virtually. So welcome to all of you. And yes, if you could, Audrey, sing them out or whatever.
Yes. I don't think I'll sing, but we have 3 questions. I'll do them one at a time. The first question is from Sarah Turner, who says, meat has been demonized, but regenerative ag offers a sustainable path for meat production. Can the panel elaborate a bit on the opportunities and challenges they see?
On the meat production side.
On Regan ag.
Meat grown in labs, I believe.
Do you need a microphone?
I have the microphone.
Oh, right,
You need
okay.
not- sorry. Meat grown in laboratories is what she's asking about in particular.
Right. So the other side of your slide, if I remember rightly, on the food production side, have a little chat about meat production by.
Do you want to go for meat product? No, okay. Yes.
No, I think this is really yours.
Yeah. So alternative protein as a whole is coming through, and there's a lot of money going into it, and from not only in sort of VC but also in sort of the private equity now that they're pushing on to the later stages of VC. There's definitely a need for it in the future. I think probably us sitting on the panel probably have quite strong feelings about regenerative agriculture. And I think maybe the questions about whether regenerative agriculture is probably the best way to go forward about it, which is if I'm just to think about.
Sounds like it, yes.
Yes, that is the preferred option, because to improve the soil on the whole, sort of on the mass scale, you cannot do it without livestock. Is that you need the animals to be grazing, to then be pooping and then stomping and then sort of doing the mob grazing, and then that's how you generate soil, and that's how it's been done, you know, before we even started farming and sort of, you know, in grazelands for years and years and years. So that's obviously the preferred route, but obviously it's not always as easy to be able to do meat production in that way. And for farms to transition across to regen ag, which is partly what Regenerate Ventures is doing, is that we invest in technologies that help farmers transition to regenerative agriculture. Because when you're doing that and you're transitioning across, there is a drop in yield when you're reducing your fertilizer or you're reducing your chemical inputs. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to stop, to plug that gap with it. But sort of there is a place for alternative proteins, I think, in the future. But I would prefer to do regen ag first.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. There's also a place for the use of insects in the production of protein, either as feeds for animals, or indeed in the same way that you eat prawns today, you might eat locusts tomorrow. Why not? What was the next question, Audrey?
Okay, so the next question is from Anne. And I think it's primarily for Addy, but if others have a view, then please do chime in. How do you see vertical farming, and is that a good option for UK farmers?
So I think that how I feel about vertical farming is that there's definitely need for it going forward as well. I think it provides, like I said, as food security going forward. But I think we can be doing a lot of it through polytunnels as well. Be interested to get your viewpoint on this in glass houses as well. If you speak to real regen ag evangelists, is that, you know, the sun is in the sky and that's how we produce food. And if you put a ceiling over it, then you're completely defeating the point of it. However, it does negate this issue of the weather systems. And I think in terms of in terms of investing in VC stages of it, I would like to see just a few big players doing it very well, fully automated second generation, no input, sort of human input to get it, and that's how it is, and do a few big players in that rather than lots of small companies doing it, because the capex involved with it sort of starting about 40 million to really get one off the ground.
Yeah.
And so,
and you need to look at the green side of it.
It's sort of the economies of scale that go with it, and the, you know, it's obviously got water reduction, but then the light and energy usage that's going into it.
Yeah, so it's a question, I think, there of scale, isn't it? And getting that scale right. You don't want to do it on a micro farming basis.
Well, I think there are people in more local food chains who can do some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But oh my goodness, you know, the vertical farming, the money that's going into it is just ridiculous. I'm sorry, I'm just blown away by it. And I think probably similar to the alternative protein, you know, the meat, impossible meat and things. I am a skeptic, except for certain situations. For example, in our sector, in soft fruits, there is a potential interest in the propagation phase, because it's so important to have healthy plants. And those are the high value propagules that you use to fruit. So actually, I can see total controlled environments being useful for that. And then there's quite a lot of sort of mis-selling that there are American companies that I sort of see being promoted as sort of something very novel, and they're just like greenhouses. You go to Holland, you know, they've been doing this for ages. They are really, really good at it, and yet somehow that's being misportrayed, I think, to investors as something new and novel, and it's, you know, so I think that's a bit weird. But I do think that with the current energy crisis, there's a huge adjustment in play, because even if you are totally using renewable energy for your vertical farm, I know of people that are generating renewable energy for their glass houses, and they're finding actually it's much more cost effective to not use it to grow a crop, but just to sell it into the grid. So they're not planting.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I agree. But I also think that if something's grown very near to where it's eaten, and a big hotel does actually have a little vertical farm in London, I think good on them, because I think the interest of people growing things are great. But if you expect to have your sourdough bread made out of unusual wheats that is grown vertically, forget it.
I completely, I think there's exactly the education play around, and the touch point of where food's produced is very important. And you do get hydroponics and in sort of office buildings and the reception areas, and it just brings back people to understand where food is coming from and their touch point on their supply chain. But as something I might add on top of this is that we don't invest in hydroponics or in alternative protein. There are other funds doing it, and we think it's more important to be supporting the farmers and transitioning them to new technologies, or using more and helping them.
You've got one last question, I think, there.
And there is only one more, so that's good. So Martina asks, are there any plans to introduce more of a multicultural model of farming rather than the monoculture that is currently popular in order to improve soil nutrients or plant cooperation? It seems like the technology could evolve to support this.
Well, I mean, we're growing wheat with clover underneath, and we're also growing more than one variety. But I went to the other, not your Oxford conference, the alternative one, which actually is called the Real Oxford Farming Conference. And there was a really interesting group who had been legally allowed to grow a complete mix of seeds. And it goes back to being allowed with the licensing of seeds. We don't have as many varieties as we could have because it costs quite a lot of money to produce a variety. Obviously, you want to grow the best new ones, but there's a place for everything. And I think that it is sad if we lose the gene pool and end up with just a few varieties. And I think that over the next 5 years, we will see more fields with more than one crop in it, whether both crops are to be eaten, if they're completely different, like growing oilseed rape and something else underneath, or the opposite thing, which is what I was saying before about putting a complete sweep of one variety like wheat to get in different weather conditions, you will have a different field. You will have the variety that grows the strongest, will be different year to year. So you'll have a different bread. And I think that would be fantastic.
I think that's very interesting. I think diversity, genetic diversity is extremely important. And just because you're doing conventional breeding programs doesn't mean that you're not maintaining as wide a possible germplasm base as possible. I'm just disputing whether heritage varieties necessarily can fit in our modern supply chains. But as an aside, my great-grandfather, when he started off growing strawberries in the 1890s, he actually wanted to grow apples. He planted his apple trees, and they were big old orchards, so the trees were a big distance apart, and they took a long time to come to maturity. So he planted underneath them gooseberry bushes, but they still took a little time to come to fruition. So underneath the gooseberry bushes, he planted strawberries because they were his cash crop, and that's how they established orchards. And there's nothing new under the sun. But I think yes, diversity and it is very interesting in the arable space, the mixed, But top fruit growers and cherry growers have been mixing varieties because of the need for pollinators in orchards and things, have been mixing varieties for quite some time. And it is something we've even thought about with strawberries, whether we'll get better pollination success if we mix up our varieties.
Thank you. That's great. Another question over there?
It's a comment, really. Can you hear me okay?
Can you?
I'm a farmer's granddaughter. And the most technical, I think my grandfather got was to have a tractor and a milking machines. But the other thing he did do, he was a very keen gardener. So I grew up on vegetables from the gardener. And Marion, I have been convinced for all my years that vegetables do not taste the same. And you've just confirmed that that's the reason why, because they are just not as nutritious, right? Because we've taken all the nutrients out of it. So I'm just so comfortable that you've told me this. I'm so happy, not happy about it, but happy that actually I'm not deluding myself. Another point is I would like to say, on this rainy Wednesday evening in the city of London, it's so nice to listen to you and be transported to a calmer world and a more beautiful world. So thank you.
How calm, exactly.
Well, you do a very good job of appearing very calm.
Thank you. Given that we're now at 7:45, unless there are other burning questions, I think we'll probably draw it to a close. So I'd like to thank the speakers in the familiar way. I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job in convincing me that actually farming is incredibly technical. And whilst there are enormous numbers of brilliant new things coming through, all of which I think will be tested and adopted on farms like the two that we've heard about today, and so many different things going on, we are really further up the curve than I thought. So that's absolutely fantastic. Just before you go, I'd like to firstly thank our hosts today, who are Moore Kingston Smith, whose offices you're sitting in. Thank them for the very, very kind wine and food that they've provided for us, and the lovely space, and also all the tech help that we've had. So thank you very much, Moore Kingston Smith.